gonna be pretty clutch.
Cool. That's the computer. Okay, so this is a Norwegian tale, and it's a folk tale. So once upon a time there was a great kingdom, and in the kingdom there was a king and there was a queen. Now the good news about these people is that they were sweet and kind and generous. But at night when they went to bed, a great grief hung between the two of them. And it was really very simple. The queen could not conceive a child. One day she is walking through the deep old forest, and out of the forest appears an old woman. And the old woman asks her, "Why are you grieving? I can sense there is something melancholic in your heart." And so the young queen tells her her troubles. And what the old woman says in response is really very simple. She says, "You need to speak your desires. You need to speak your longings into a little cup just like that. At dusk, breathe your longings and your desires into this cup and place it on this dark soil. In the morning, come back to the cup, and when you pick it up, out of it will come 2 flowers. One is red and the other is white. Now this is very important," says the old woman. "Whatever you do, don't eat the red flower, but only the white." Now I don't know why it is we do this in our lives, but we do, even with the very best advice. The young queen the next morning picks up the cup, flips it over, out comes 2 flowers. One is red and one is white. And as her hand is reaching for the white flower, as if out of her control, it flips in the air, plucks the red one, and she guzzles it down. And immediately she recognizes that she is pregnant and that a baby is on the way. Now 9 months pass, and it is a dark and rainy night, and they are in a tower. And there is a doula and a midwife, and there are the old women who are singing the 10,000 secrets that must enter a woman's bloodstream as she gives birth. And as she is pushing out this baby into the world, what scuttles out between her legs is not a child at all. It is a small, black serpent. And now the old doula sees this freakish little thing, and she grabs it and throws it out the window. Moments later, out comes a little boy, a beautiful baby boy. And from that evening onward, not another word is said about the black snake that was hurled into the forest. It simply never happened. Now years pass, and this young boy grows up, and he is healthy and he is in good shape, and he mounts his horse one day to go off into the kingdom and look for his bride. And he is moving through the forest when, in front of him at a crossroads, up rears this giant, vast black serpent, steaming out of its nostrils, and the black serpent says, "Older brothers marry first." Now, the young boy turns on his horse, tries to go in a different direction, and he comes across another crossroads. And there again is the black serpent saying, "Older brothers marry first." And all day long at every crossroads appears the serpent. And so the young boy returns to the castle, and he asks his mom and dad, the king and queen, "Is there something you didn't tell me about the night I was born?" And they say, "Why, no, son, there's nothing. But why don't we go speak to the old doula who was there that night?" And they go to speak to the old doula. And she does recall that indeed there was a strange incident with a black serpent that was hurled into the forest. And surely this being has grown strong, and has grown in power, and it is ready to be married. And so what happens next is really the quite remarkable part of this story, because what the king and queen say in response is this: "We must make a room in our home for this serpent. We will not have it executed or assassinated. We will not send out mercenaries and soldiers to bring it down, but we must bring it closer. And so they send out the most beautiful poets and musicians to lure the serpent into the castle. And they send word out through all of the kingdom that indeed there is a prince looking to be married. Now, at first, many women come to marry this prince, even though they don't know quite who he is. And one by one, they're eaten. One by one, in the morning, there's nothing but bones on the floor. So you can imagine that the castle gets quite a reputation. And so it comes as a surprise to the king and the queen when one day word comes from the edge of the kingdom that there is still one woman who is prepared to marry this beast. But she says this, "Give me 1 year and a day to prepare." And they say, "Of course, whatever you want." Now what you should know about this young woman is that she was the daughter of a shepherd. She was very friendly with the forest. The forest would speak to her. So after she had said this, she is wandering through the forest and she says, "My God, I've agreed to marry a serpent. I don't quite know what was possessing me to say this. What should I do?" And as she was saying this, she was sitting beside the old roots of an oak tree. And through the center of that oak tree, out comes an old woman. And the old woman says this, "You must prepare 12 dresses to be worn on your wedding night. And for each dress, you are to sew a beautiful design around the place where the heart is. Then, on the night of your wedding, you are to wear each of these dresses. And bring with you into the wedding chamber also 1 bath of lye and 1 bath of milk. Also bring with you 2 large metal scrubbing brushes. This is my advice," says the old woman. And with that, she goes back into the tree and is gone. 1 year and 1 day passes. And the young woman is married to the serpent. And even as the serpent is wrapping its tail around her body, instead of panicking like all of the other brides, she simply looked at him and said, "That's right, you are my husband." They go into the chamber, and the serpent says, "Come on, take off your dress." And the woman says, "I will take off 1 of my dresses if you take off 1 set of your scales." And the serpent says, "No one has ever asked me to do this before." And he does it. And it is a painful thing, much screaming. And hour after hour after hour, layer after layer after layer, the serpent undresses his scales, and what remains underneath him resembles something of a glowing mass. It looks something quite like a worm. And it's a freaking mess in there. And it's at that point that the young woman brings out the lye, brings out the water of ashes, and she takes the 2 metal scrubbing brushes and she scrubs the flesh of this being until, underneath all of that, there is indeed the face of a man. The face of a man that looks like it was sent into exile 17 years ago. And it is at that moment that the young woman takes the man into the bath of milk and washes him clean. Now the next morning, the king and the queen return to the wedding chamber, and they're expecting to see the same scene they have seen every other time before. Bones on the ground, and the prince saying, "The older brother marries first." But instead what they see is a young woman and a young man, and what the Irish say is radiant contentment. Now, as far as I know, in this kingdom, in every one of you, and everywhere, there is a young woman with an educated heart, and a young man who has learnt to shed his scales. The end.